Welcome back to Around the 412. You're part of the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I am Tyler, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Smitty. Be sure to follow us on every channel where you listen to our podcast, whether that's Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you find us and are listening to us. We have our own separate channel from the DK Pittsburgh Sports channel. Be sure to go give that a follow. And if you're feeling really nice, give us a rating. Also, we launched our Christmas fundraiser. It's called Rockin' Around the 412. It's on GoFundMe. It is the pinned tweet on our Twitter, and as well, you can go to GoFundMe.com, and you can check it out there. Just search Rockin' Around the 412. It should come up right up. Help bring kids a great Christmas with us.
Boom. There it is. The only thing you forgot, we're also trying to give away Steelers tickets. Unrelated to everything else you just said.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, we're trying to give them away.
17,000. Yeah, we're trying.
That's the emphasis on trying. We're literally we want to give these tickets away, but people just don't want them, I guess.
Steelers, Ravens. What more could you ask for? Who knows? Maybe Kenny Pickett's playing quarterback at that time. We'll talk about a lot more about him a little bit later. But Steelers, Ravens tickets, we're trying to give them away on Twitter. When we hit 17,000 followers, we're at like 15.3 something. So we got a ways to go, and not a whole lot. Yeah, and not a whole lot of time left. We got about a month until the season, a little less than a month until the season kicks off. A little bit more than a month until the home opener. So, guys, if you want a chance at some Steeler tickets, you got to make it happen. But all right, let's start off talking about everybody's favorite team in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Pirates. Really, the only thing to talk about here. Finally, Roansy Contreras coming back up to the Major League club. He's going to pitch tomorrow against the Red Sox, or today, I guess, by the time people are watching or listening to this. So that's a good thing. I'm wondering why it didn't happen before. You know, what was really the need for him to stay down as long as he did? They said they were almost using it as like a start of the season again, like from the All-Star break, to build his arm back up and get his innings back up. I don't know, but whatever. This team has done so many things this year. It's like hard to even question them at this point. And not just this year, really the way that the franchise is run in general is very head scratching for the most part. So you almost become accustomed to it. So you stop questioning things because there's so many things to question. You know what I mean? It's just become numb.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And Shelton was asked about like Roansy Contreras' development and stuff. And the answer was very underwhelming. It's like, why do we not have nice things in Pittsburgh when it comes to baseball? You said that everybody's favorite team in Pittsburgh. I'm sure that even the most diehard Pirates fans that really only care about the Pirates in Pittsburgh, they're not even their favorite team in Pittsburgh right now. So it's really just tough. And it's one thing, like if you were just you were competitive but losing games, they just look terrible. And they've looked terrible for a while.
Yeah, Jim, Northside Notch, part of North Shore 9, he brought up this recently, but like the Royals, right? Like they're a bad team, but they have players that are up right now that they're producing, and it's fun to watch. Like I think they
also broke the Dodgers winning streak.
Yeah, exactly. I think like the attitude towards the Pirates would probably be a little bit different if, you know, we did have O'Neal Cruz producing already. And by the way, this isn't like going to turn into a Cruz Bass session or anything like that. I'm very hopeful. I'm very excited about his future. It's just, it's going to take some time for him to adjust. I think that's apparent, and it hasn't necessarily all clicked for him yet. You know, Jack Sawinski hasn't been up here, even though his 100 WRC plus, literally league average, would be the second highest on the Pirates. That's how bad offensively they are. League average would be second best on the Pirates. There's just like T. Brian Hayes. He just went on the IL, and he's dealing with a little bit of an injury right now. But even before that, you know what you're getting fielding wise, but we're seeing literally the floor of him as a player because of what he's produced offensively this year. There's just like, I don't know how we're sitting here at this point in the rebuild, and it's not like I expected a complete product at the major league level, but I don't know how you can sit here and just assume that, you know, in a year or two, all of a sudden things are going to magically fall in place and this team's going to be competing right now. I think that like that tone has started to change a little bit, where people are really starting to question, is this team on the path that we thought that they were going to be? Are they going to be better in 2024, 2025?
And I don't know how much of that is actually on the players themselves. I mean, we talk about a lot when it comes to the old regime versus the new, about like the development of players at the lower levels, and once they get up to the major leagues and stuff, and how they perform and everything. But I mean, we're at the point where we should start questioning like management, coaches, like what's going on, and why have we not seen the development of some of these guys that we are continuing to see? That's what we thought was going to be one of the biggest points that changed whenever we got this new regime with Ben Sherrington and Derek Shelton. But we really haven't seen that much improvement in the prospects that are coming up. Like, why can't we have guys that are producing like the Kansas City Royals do? Is their development team better than ours? Maybe, but I don't really see that much of a difference when it comes to Neil Huntington era versus Ben Sherrington era. It just has not really changed that much in terms of what we're getting as far as developing these guys and getting them up to the MLB level and what they do at the MLB level. That's why I don't want to put it all on the players. I'm not going to harp on the players solely because I just don't think that the staff on the Pirates is that great of one either.
Yeah. And, time will tell, obviously, because it's only the past couple years. But I think that the difference there, too, is I know it's a crapshoot, but these are all high picks that the Pirates have had under Ben Sherrington as well in the draft. And we're talking about like already questioning, and maybe it's just a durability thing, but, questioning the development of Nick Gonzalez, and Henry Davis hasn't really been able to stay healthy, So it's just, I think that if these guys were performing even at the minor league level and some of these guys at the major league level, even though the record would be what it is, I think that we'd still have a lot more hope. Like, okay, like 2023 we might see them start to turn the page. By 2024, they really should be, kind of in the mix for things. And I don't know how you look at the team right now and organization as a whole and still think that that's the case as we sit here.
Yeah, and then when you mix in the development problems that the Pirates have mixed with some of the management in-game decisions that Derek Shelton has showed over the past few seasons, it just doesn't bode well for really the future or what Pirates fans think the future could be.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if O'Neal Cruz isn't a star, move the team into Montreal. I don't care. Because if they somehow mess that up, I don't want them in Pittsburgh.
Hey, I mean, the rights at PNC Park are up in, 2036? So we're only like 14 years away.
Think about that. Think about what we're going to be in 14. We'll around the 412 still be going in 14 years. We're going to make a
14 years, Smitty and I will be 41 years old. So we'll see if we can take kids to Pirates games when we're 41.
Oh, boy. Yeah. All right. Well, that about does it for the Pirates talk. You guys can all clap your hands and actually come and listen to the show now when we come back. When we do come back, we're going to talk about the Steelers actually played a preseason game, maybe like the most exciting preseason football game of all time. I don't know. Maybe.
Could be.
But we'll talk about that at Acrisure Stadium, by the way. We will talk about that football game and also what's been going on at training camp when we come back. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. And welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm Smitty. That is Tyler. Like I said previously, right before we came back from the break, we're going to talk about the Steelers. We actually got a preseason game to talk about. Obviously, training camp has continued on as well, but really I want to focus on this preseason game. The first one to take place at Acrisure Stadium. I have to train myself to say that.
Gross.
I think I said that a couple weeks ago too. I instinctively just said Heinz Field.
Yeah, but, I saw the broadcast team on the preseason game, so don't sweat it.
There you go. But a lot of good things to take away from this game. I mean, I think, well, actually, let's start with a negative just because there was only a couple, I think. I think the offensive line looked better for sure, but I still think in pass pro they weren't as good. In run
pass
blocking, I thought they were fantastic. Yeah. Pass pro, I think there were still a lot of questions. And I think the coverage from the middle linebackers, which going back to last year, that was an issue. From a run defense perspective, I really didn't think they were that bad until we got to the second and third team. And at that point, I'm like, okay, these guys aren't going to be playing anyway, so I don't necessarily care how much Seattle's second and third team is running on our second and third team. But overall, from the guys that are actually going to be contributing on Sundays, I liked what I saw from an overall team perspective there.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I think that from certain players it wasn't so good, but overall team perspective, I thought it was better than what I was looking for. And what I noticed, especially on offense, is that we have athletic quarterbacks now. That was something that stood out right away, is that we do not have a 39-year-old Ben Roethlisberger anymore. Whether it's Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, or even Mason Rudolph. In a way, he's younger, a lot younger than Ben was, so he can at least move around more fluidly And that's something that stuck out to me right away. I thought a lot of guys on the offense performed well, like a lot of the skill position guys. Like you said, the offensive line overall, they weren't that great in pass protection, but run blocking, they were really good. And I think one battle in particular that we've talked about on the show, if you're Kevin Dotson, you got a little bit happier watching that preseason game because Kendrick Green did not have a great night that night. So even though you are injured and weren't able to practice and play in the game, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, perhaps, for Kevin Dotson to still reclaim his starting left guard spot because Kendrick Green, at least in the first game, did not look that great.
You're right. And kind of tied in with, like I said, I want to focus on this game, but training camp, we have had a practice take place since. And when they returned to training camp, it was Kevin Dotson with the ones and Kendrick Green with the twos. Now, they've kind of been rotating. I know you said, as you mentioned, Kevin Dotson wasn't practicing. So who knows? Tomorrow could bring something totally different. We could see Green with the ones again and Dotson with the twos. Who knows how this just shake out, but it just goes to show you that this is an ongoing battle and could change within 24 hours who is, the leader of the pack. But another interesting thing that I thought, and to your point, I thought all three quarterbacks played well. Even Mason not necessarily being as mobile as the other two guys, I thought he looked really good. And what was odd, and I don't want to talk about this too much. Ramon kind of already said his piece on, the fans booing when Mason came into the game, just absolutely ridiculous. But he, not necessarily his fault because Dan Moore just gets absolutely blown away by the guy. But the first snap is fumbled that Mason Rudolph takes, and they almost lose the ball.
Right.
The second snap that he takes is a dime to George Pickens in the back of the end zone, just enough space.
That's the thing. People are talking about the catch by Pickens, but they're not. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people aren't giving Rudolph the credit.
There's nowhere else to put that ball. I mean, any higher and Pickens can't get it. Any lower and the defender's breaking that up. I mean, it was literally the only spot that ball could be. So really nice throw from Mason, and it's good to see. I mean, why would you not want to see all three guys putting their best foot forward and going out there and competing every day? And that's exactly what it sounds like is happening through training camp, and we got to see it happen in the preseason. For guys that stood out, Jaylen Warren was a guy that we talked about a little bit going into this game, and for him to kind of solidify that, I know he did fumble the ball, and that's really going to be the talk for the coaching staff, especially not necessarily the fans because they didn't lose the fumble or anything like that. And Jaylen Warren did make some other nice plays, scored a touchdown. He did some nice work out of the backfield catching the ball. I actually highlighted that on Twitter. He had 4 receptions for 30 yards and a touchdown receiving too.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not calling him this type of player, but just from a stature standpoint, at 5'8", and when he runs, he gets even lower. He just looks so much like Maurice Jones-Drew in the way that he runs with the football in his hands. But obviously, I'm not calling him that type of player. But it's nice to see.
Hey, you had another
somebody
one
like
of those
that
on Twitter this week.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to see a guy like that we've kind of been pounding the drum and talking about through training camp go out and do it in a game scenario against the Seattle Seahawks on Saturday. George Pickens obviously been like the talk of camp, and I just mentioned he has a receiving touchdown, kind of validating that hype up to this point. Miles Jack obviously only played a very short amount of time, but he looked really good in the short amount of time that he did.
His counterpart did not.
Yeah, his counterpart did not. And that play has been blown up and highlighted a lot too. Chuks Okorafor, that block on the Trubisky touchdown to Gunnar Olszewski.
That is a strong man. That's a big man.
And see, that goes back to, okay, so for the rest of the offensive line, we feel like they're going to be better in run protection, or I'm sorry, in run blocking than pass protection. Chuks is the opposite of that, where he's not a road grader. He doesn't offer much in the run game, but he might be their best pass blocker along that offensive line. At least to this point, we'll see if Dan Moore continues his trajectory and stuff. But at least right now, I mean, and for Chuks to do that and kind of show people that is in there, if this offensive line can put it together, he's obviously going to be a big part in doing it, the veteran of that offensive line group. But yeah, getting back to this, and obviously I want to talk about Kenny Pickett separately, but I think that you saw what you wanted to see from the first and second teams for sure. Other than, again, you could highlight certain guys, Devin Bush, obviously Kendrick Green had his low lights as well. But overall it was a good performance. Now
a guy that, I was going to say a guy I wanted to highlight that I was kind of impressed with was Anthony McFarland, because throughout the first couple seasons with him on the Steelers, we haven't really seen a lot from him production-wise. And I understand it's a preseason game. He's not going to go in against the ones or anything, but I think he showed hey, I'm still around. I can still be a productive running back. And he showed that he can also be productive in between the tackles on some plays as well. We didn't only see him bouncing it out to the outside. So I was impressed with him because obviously he was like the number one back going into this game. And I didn't know, even though it was a preseason game, I didn't know what to expect from Anthony McFarland, because basically everything we've seen is that he can't run in between the tackles, and if he doesn't bounce it to the outside, he's not going to gain yards. And honestly, most of his yardage in Steeler games have probably come from passing out of the backfield as opposed to running out of the backfield. But I was pleasantly surprised. I think he had like 7 or 8 carries for 50 some odd yards. I think he averaged around 8 yards per carry, which was a pleasant surprise for me. I think that he impressed me and showed that like he can actually be used in this offense as well. And then speaking of like being used in the offense, did you notice like it looked different? Some of the play calling, like it's like night and day. We had questioned so much. How is the offense going to be different now that he has a mobile quarterback, or mobile quarterbacks, I guess I should say? And I thought it looked night and day compared to what we had previously seen from Matt Canada under play calling.
Yeah. To go back first with McFarland, 7 carries, 56 yards, didn't catch the ball, which interestingly enough, like you said, that kind of goes against how they had utilized him in previous preseasons. Obviously, we haven't seen much of him in the regular season at all to this point,
right,
which should be interesting with him. And, if I'm looking at it from my perspective, I think both of the guys that we've talked about, him and Jaylen Warren, have jumped Benny Snell in the depth chart, whether it's, unfortunately he's kind of in that same boat where he just hasn't been available to practice and stuff. But for me right now, I would have those McFarland and Warren both on the roster as the number 2 and 3. What you're saying about the look of the offense, I mean, how can you not? First off, Mitch Trubisky's a guy historically, I think we've talked about this on here, gets the ball, rolls out to his right, pretty much immediately cuts off half the field. I can't imagine that we're going to break historical tendency for a guy like this that's in year 6 or anything like that. But the touchdown throw to Gunnar Olszewski, he does the complete opposite of what, historically says Mitch Trubisky's going to do. So I don't know if that's something, and it's just one preseason game. Maybe we're reading into it too much. But that was obviously nice to see him break those trends, because obviously that's pretty easy to game plan for if he's going to do that. What were you about to say?
I was to say the play that you tweeted about Steven Sims for, that play looks directly out of 2016 Pitt Matt Canada, his playbook. Like that looked like what they would do with Quadri Henderson all the time. And I didn't really see that last year. I mean, they tried it. I know they've tried like those jet sweep plays with Claypool and Juju a little bit, but like that one was maybe it was just because it was executed way better, but it just looked different, and like multiple plays gave me that vibe that Matt Canada is actually like opening up the playbook we thought we would see when he was initially named offensive coordinator.
So I've seen them run that sweep out of that alignment once before, and it's probably happened more, but I remember it once, and it was the goal line touchdown run that Claypool had against the Eagles, because he wasn't lined up at receiver. He was almost like in line, kind of where like Derek Watt will line up. Yeah. And that's where Steven Sims came from to take that handoff. But that was the first play that Kenny Pickett was in. But what I wanted to bring up with that, running complex things like that, it almost, like, I understand that like people were saying with Kenny Pickett's throw, like he was 13 of 15 passing, but really didn't take the deep shot. It was just efficient stuff, just getting him in rhythm. That's kind of what Kenny Pickett is, though. But at the same time, to me, when you're running stuff like that Steven Sims play and you're putting the trust in Kenny Pickett to execute that, I know he's not throwing the ball, but he's got to get up there and still, do those things, read that play and make the correct calls and get the offense ready. That to me shows some faith in the guy already to be able to go out and do that. I know it doesn't mean much in a preseason game, but that was obviously nice to see. And then just continuing on with that, obviously he throws that touchdown pass to Jaylen Warren, and then he throws the touchdown pass at the end of the game, which they probably shouldn't have even had another shot to do, but Mark Robinson gives them an extra chance on offense. But I don't know how you walk away from this game not pleased with what you saw from Kenny Pickett. It was just an efficient Kenny Pickett performance. If you watched him in college, it's a lot like what you saw there. He's not going to make mistakes.
That's literally what I was about to say.
Yeah, like if you want to call it a game manager, so be it. I think he offers a little bit more upside than that. I want to bring up a comparison to see what you think about this, because we were talking about, and this is necessarily, so it started out as like a fantasy conversation about Deontay Johnson that Drew and I were having, because I think that you can look at this offense and say there's no way Deontay Johnson can match his target volume from last year and put up those same types of numbers. First off, Trubisky and Pickett both are, again, going back to at least historical tendencies, guys that target the middle of the field much more often. So you think like Freiermuth and Claypool are really going to be the big beneficiaries there. Secondly, they're going to lean on the run a lot more than like the short passing attack. I think that what we saw last year with Ben and such, it's just Ben was peppering Deontay Johnson with targets, 169 last year. Don't think that he's going to be able to repeat that. But what I did say is, depending on how quickly we see Kenny Pickett, it might not even be this year. So this could be just, again, we were talking more to dynasty stuff. Depending on how quickly we see Kenny Pickett and how good he is out of structure and making things happen in that facet, but he keeps his eyes down the field and waits for plays to develop, I almost feel like Deontay Johnson could end up being his Jordan Addison, like we saw in college, because of Deontay Johnson's ability to create space for himself and do things down the field. I think if there's somebody on the roster right now, it's probably Deontay Johnson. But again, I think there is where the difference is between Trubisky and Pickett, is that when the play breaks down, Mitch is a guy that will make mistakes. And to me, on the reverse side of that, Kenny Pickett plays his best football when the play breaks down and he's out of structure.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett plays backyard football at its best. Like whenever you have to scramble, that's when Kenny Pickett thrives. As far as that comparison goes, I can definitely see that. I mean, I think that, and I'm not saying that Jordan Addison is going to be Deontay Johnson level in the NFL, but like as far as like comparing the play styles of the type of receiver they are, I think they're fairly similar. Jordan Addison, a little smaller receiver that plays on the outside. I think the same thing with Deontay Johnson. They're very agile, good in close space, and they can make really room at any point of the field. And I can see that. And if Kenny Pickett, if he's used to having that type of receiver, then Deontay Johnson could be that for him. And then as far as just Kenny Pickett goes himself, like I was saying a couple minutes ago, and you said it as well, anybody who watched Kenny Pickett at Pitt knows that Kenny Pickett is not just the flashy big play quarterback. That's not what you're going to get out of him. The thing that is, I think, lethal about Kenny Pickett as a quarterback is that he's not going to make mistakes, and he's just going to gash you, like drive the ball down the field, and he can do it with like taking up a lot of clock as well, which can be hurtful for some teams. I think that's what you're getting, and that's, if you want to call it a game manager, sure, like you said, you can call it that, but I think he's more than that. I think he has a higher skill level than most would call quote unquote game managers, and I think that something that game managers don't typically have that Kenny has also is his legs. I think that his mobility has always been a little bit underrated. It's not like he's like Lamar Jackson level, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's mobile like that, but ability to move and make plays on the run and also run for yards when he needs to. I think he has a great ability to do so. And so I think that Kenny Pickett, he shined in this game, obviously. The ovation that he received just running onto the field before he even made a play, that was probably one of the loudest points in the entire game. So that was nice to see the reception from all the fans. But it makes you more excited about the draft pick. I feel like if there was a lot of Steeler fans that were still questioning, especially like watching Malik Willis in a game the day prior in a preseason game. I'm sure there were some Steeler fans still salty, like, well, why didn't we take this guy? We took Pickett instead. He's not as good of a quarterback. I think Pickett really showed that he belongs in the NFL, and he belongs on the Steelers, and I think he fits in great.
Yeah, it's I understand, like, you know, that it's just one preseason game. Let's not get over ourselves or anything like that. But it's on the reverse side of that. It's like, okay, did you want him to play bad then instead? Like, how would that have?
What's the thing? What would people be saying if he played bad? They would be overreacting. So why? I don't think it's a real overreaction to say the kid played well. He looked like he belonged in the NFL.
Right. And that's not saying, you know, that he's some superstar and all of a sudden we think that he can bring a Lombardi here, but it's just, he showed you what you wanted to see, maybe even more than what you could hope for in a preseason debut for a guy that, while yes, he was playing against reserves of the Seahawks, keep in mind on the reverse side of that, he's also playing with reserves on his own team. Like Tyler Vaughns is the one that catches the game-winning touchdown. That guy's not going to be on the Steelers 53-man roster most likely. And let's talk about that, because unfortunately, these things always have a way of figuring themselves out, and sometimes it's due to injuries when you talk about the roster bubble. Anthony Miller is going to be out for the season, as well as Carl Joseph. To me, those were two guys both like right there. I think Carl Joseph probably for sure would have been on the 53 for me. Anthony Miller was kind of fighting with a spot with like the Miles Boykins of the world, maybe Steven Sims after his really nice preseason showing on Saturday. And I think Gunnar was probably more of a lock than anybody because he's on a 2-year deal, as well as the fact that he was running with the ones. Mitch targeted him 4 times in that game. Like, I think that's a pretty good indication they expect him to be.
I'll be honest, as a receiver, I thought he looked good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Claypool was just talking about him on Tuesday, and he said he didn't want to speak like and make it seem like just a general statement about little white receivers, but he just had a feeling that he was going to be shifty and be able to create space in the slot. That's basically what he said. And I was like, yeah, Claypool thinks like every white receiver is just Julian Edelman, basically.
Right.
Is what he's saying. No, but Gunnar did look good. So, but again, back to the point here, Anthony Miller being out for the season, that obviously is going to open a spot there for somebody if he was going to be one of those 6, like assuming they keep 6 because of how talented that group is. Calvin Austin, which I guess I should tie this in as well. He was in a boot on Saturday. Tuesday, he shed that boot at practice, so no longer in it. Didn't practice, but that's obviously a good sign that it's not as serious as what we had maybe thought with him being in a boot. So that's great to see. But we had this conversation already, I think, a week or 2 ago with the wide receivers on the roster. So obviously, Deontay, Claypool, Pickens, Calvin Austin. There's 4. Gunnar, I think, is a lock at 5, even though some people might not make him a lock. I am going to. So then you have one spot for the 6, and it's like, okay, Miles Boykin, they claimed him on waivers. They liked him enough to do so. They really like what he brings to the special teams. And here's the other part of this I'm not sure enough people are talking about is, unlike some of the other guys, I know that he doesn't have like a great body of work, even though he does have pretty good pedigree, but he can actually play on the outside. Like, he gives you a backup on the outside that maybe nobody else does. Like, if it comes down to him or Cody White as an actual receiver, I mean, which one are you taking?
It's Miles Boykin. I mean, I said last week, whenever we were discussing the wide receivers, that I would have even taken Gunnar out of there, and I would have had Anthony Miller and Miles Boykin both making the squad. At this point, especially after the game, I feel like that kind of more solidified for me. Like, yeah, Gunnar's going to be on this team whenever they announce the 53-man roster. So if I'm just picking one, I would still think that it would be Miles Boykin for that luxury, like you're saying, having an outside guy. And I think the size of Boykin as well, something that really only Claypool has when it comes to the other receivers. But as far as like others competing go, like Steven Sims, he looked good in punt returns, and he also had that run. I mean, receiving, he only had the 1 catch for 2 yards. So he didn't at least show out in the game, but I guess that he still will have more opportunities to show. Plus, he looks like a new AB in town, according to your tweet. Bro, how much were you getting attacked for that?
But that's the thing. Like, I don't know what else was I supposed to say in the original tweet. Like, how much more clear could I have made that I'm not comparing the two as players from a talent perspective or anything else, just physically, and also the way that he gets up and just drops the ball, and he's wearing the band on his arm, just like AB. Like, everything about that one moment and kind of the punt return too.
I fully understand it. And like you said, the way he celebrated to get up and drop the ball, and he was like kind of stiff-legged walking the way that AB used to. Yeah, I fully understand it. But I feel like you got attacked so much for that.
And that's the thing too. Like, the vocal minority is always going to rise to the top, and that's what you're going to see.
Yeah.
But for that to get as much attention as it did, like with all the likes and people agreeing, like obviously the majority thought the exact same thing. Like, there were some people that were like, no, don't see it at all. Okay, well, congratulations, but you're in the minority. Sorry to tell you.
Right.
But yeah, so I looked at that, and I think like Sims probably is going to have an elevated opportunity in the upcoming preseason game against the Jaguars. Now, with knowing that Anthony Miller is not going to be there again, I would, like you just mentioned, him not really having a role as a receiver. I think that that's going to be telling. Like, if he again doesn't have much of a role as a receiver, it's Miles Boykin that's going to be that 6th receiver for sure for me.
Yeah, and just to speak on Carl Joseph, you mentioned him whenever you were bringing this up. I think the main thing that sucks for that is he was a guy that was most likely going to make the 53-man roster, and this just really hurts the safety depth. I mean, we've talked about the depth along the defense, that there's multiple positions that have questionable depth, and I think that losing that behind he's a strong safety, right? So he'd be behind Terrell Edmonds.
He's played both.
He's played both?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, either way, I don't think the depth at any of the secondary positions is that great behind the starters. So it just hurts that in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is it really makes it a blessing that they went out and got DeMonte KZ. And obviously you have a developing defensive back. You can kind of use a Swiss Army knife and Trey Norwood, who I wish I would have highlighted before, but now I'm glad that I get to say his name and highlight him now. I think he was 0 for 6 when he was targeted and had a couple pass breakups on Saturday. That's a guy that kind of going back and trying to think of conversations we had the last couple weeks about this team. I really liked him as a player. I like what he did as a rookie, and you can only expect that is going to, like, his trajectory in year 2. They're probably going to be relying on him a lot if they weren't already now that Carl Joseph's going to be out. But beyond that, I mean, you look at like Miles Killebrew really doesn't play anything defensively. He's just here for special teams. So to me, I look at this and say, okay, like KZ, Norwood, really those two are going to have to step maybe this opens the door. No, I don't see it. Like, they have Donovan Steiner right now in camp. I don't see him making the 53. Maybe they go out and get somebody else, but nah.
I think they'll probably stick with what they have.
The thing is too, like, Carl Joseph was being used in the slot as well. And you have like Millette and Cam Sutton there too. I think that they're going to be fine with the defensive backs they have. Neither one of these guys are moving the needle, meaning Anthony Miller and Carl Joseph, on what the Steelers are going to do this season, I don't think. But it's just like you said, it hurts the depth at the positions a little bit. Anthony Miller was definitely in the mix for wide receiver 6, and Carl Joseph was probably going to make the team as a guy to contribute in the slot and play backup safety. So it's unfortunate.
Happy that Ahkello Witherspoon is healthy.
Yeah,
he was injured on Saturday. He practiced on Monday, so that's good. He was not like fully injured, or not fully injured, but he wasn't like seriously injured.
Just a stinger probably.
That was going to scare me, honestly, because cornerback is the position I would worry about the depth more than safety. And so if he was seriously injured, then that would have been a big hurt for the Steelers defense.
He took that right on the shoulder, and the way his shoulder was kind of hanging there, it took me back to Juju's shoulder injury against the Broncos last year, where I was like, oh man, no. Like, and so, because he's been so good for the team. I mean, going back to last year, obviously, once he did get an opportunity and grasped the playbook and got out there, he was really good. And this year, just through training camp, he's really been the only guy to match up and be able to compete with George Pickens and limit him a little bit. So, I think Ahkello Witherspoon is, I would definitely say he's the CB1 of this team. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a stretch. We haven't seen enough of Levi Wallace and Cam Sutton. Obviously, I'm a huge fan, but I think he's good in his role. I think Ahkello Witherspoon is clear-cut the number 1 cornerback for this team.
Yeah, that's safe to say.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about one last thing. We talked about it with the boys over Tip of the Iceberg. If you guys want to check out their podcast, obviously we 100% recommend doing so. Tristan Jarry, I don't know if a lot of people know this because of all the contracts, 6-year deals being thrown around right now. He's coming up on the last year of his deal. Is that something that we need to focus on right now, or should we let the season play out? We're going to talk about that more when we come back. This is Around the 412 on the Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm Smitty. That is Tyler. Let's wrap up the show talking about Tristan Jarry. Maybe not something that people expected to hear us talking about as a talking point in the show at this point right now, where we're at kind of the dead period for the NHL and the Penguins. But Tristan Jarry going into the last year of his contract. I mentioned this was something we talked about on a different podcast. Check out Tip of the Iceberg. Is a Tristan Jarry extension something that you as a fan think the Penguins need to be thinking about right now? Would you let him play out the last year of his deal and focus on it then? I mean, where are you at? Where do you think the team should go with this? And where would you if you had your say?
So
2-part question.
I'm at, it's a 3-part question. Where I'm at is I think they do need to be thinking about it. And the reason that I say that is because what are the options behind Tristan Jarry that are at least in the organization right now? Now, currently, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm trying to get to a certain page. But I think that the problem is you don't have goalie depth in the organization. You've only got one goalie that is probably worth anything down that's going to be in the minors in Joel Blomqvist. Besides that, you have nobody that is going to be contending for a starter spot anytime soon. But even Joel Blomqvist, he's not going to be contending for a starter spot for at least a couple more seasons. So I think that you have to at least entertain the idea of an extension of Tristan Jarry. Now, the tough part with that is I think that, and this is, I'll answer the fan perspective, or I guess I'll kind of answer it. The tough part is we haven't seen him perform in the playoffs. Right. I mean, we did the 1 year, and that performance was
performed
terrible.
well in the playoffs.
Performed well in the playoffs, yeah. Let me clarify that. I think the problem is that we've seen one bad performance, and in one game this past season, he was thrown into Game 6. His foot was clearly still injured, and it was basically like, you are our last hope in net because Louis Domingue has not been good for us. We need you to at least try to win this game. And he gave it his all, but it didn't end up coming. He came up short. Mm-hmm. I think that that's the problem with the fan base, is probably so many people have this bitter taste still in their mouth about Tristan Jarry because of what happened against the Islanders in 2020 or 21. And I don't blame them. Like, it's fair judgment to say, like, this guy didn't perform in the playoffs, but I don't think you can say that and also ignore like how he turned that season into a productive season this year. For the better part of a season, he was one of the better goalies in the league. And I think that, and I said this on their show, the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, that I think that what really harpened on Tristan Jarry was playing in too many games, getting too many starts because they couldn't rely on the backups to get them some wins. And I think that that's moving forward. What I would change is try to not like split the starts 50-50 or anywhere close to that, but maybe Tristan Jarry starts in 50 and Casey DeSmith starts in 32, or he starts 52, Casey DeSmith starts 30. Something more along the lines of that. That would help Tristan Jarry. And then as far as an organization standpoint, I feel like they have to be closer to what I'm thinking. This guy's he's been productive for you in the regular season. Sure, he had that terrible playoff against the Islanders, but he didn't get the opportunity to play in the playoffs except for that one game this past season. And if you're an organization looking behind him, what else do you have? So, yes, I do think that they have to at least be thinking extension. The tough part is, what kind of extension do you give a guy that has had some solid regular season play, but you haven't even seen a good postseason yet from?
Yeah, I think to your point with where the organization's at is they had a new front office and ownership group now come in, and yet they could have done that last offseason at the trade deadline, and now this offseason addressed goaltender more than what they actually did. You know, bringing Casey DeSmith back, obviously adding a third goaltender in Tokarski, but they never went out and got somebody to replace Tristan Jarry. So to me, that's at least a vote of confidence there. So they obviously like him, at least enough to do that. Now, that's why I say, like, I also think that they like him enough to explore an extension with. And another thing that you said that I liked was not being able to ignore, you know, the performance that he put forward in the regular season last year. But let's also go back to look at the All-Star season that he had when he was kind of splitting the net with Matt Murray. And to your point, I think that's kind of what they need to get to. And you mentioned that too. Maybe not necessarily a 50-50 split, because that really wasn't even down the stretch of 50-50 split due to performance. But they need to be closer to that in order to get the most out of Tristan Jarry. And, you know, is that on the roster right now? We'll see. I think that we were both kind of in the camp, like, being underwhelmed by DeSmith coming back. And that was, you know, again, due to just like, how can you run it back with the same duo when you've seen what that's yielded playoff results wise the last couple seasons? But if you were to just look at his body of work and what he's getting paid, it's fair. It's a fair deal for what DeSmith's coming back for. And then you add in the insurance of Tokarski, who is an upgrade for me from Louis Domingue as a third goaltender. I think, you know, they've at least addressed goaltending a little bit, but you're still banking on Tristan Jarry to be the exact same guy he was in the regular season last year. And then to take it a step further, finally having that stamp on the postseason, you know, maybe even if it's not like, I do think that we're going to get to a point
around.
I was going to say, we've gotten to a point as a fan base where it's like almost like the Steelers not winning a playoff game, like with the Penguins with playoff series. Right. but he can't be the reason that they lose if they were to lose in the playoffs.
Yeah, so I brought up two different pages on Cap Friendly. The first to answer what kind of money would Tristan Jarry warrant in a new contract, because it's tough. And so I just thought I'd go by looking on Cap Friendly at this past season, some goalies that had similar save percentages and what those cap numbers look like around where he is. And just to name some guys, Igor Shesterkin, $5.6 million. Ilya Sorokin, $4 million. Frederik Andersen, $4.5 million. Jacob Markstrom, $6 million. Darcy Kemper, $4.5 million. Tristan Jarry has $3.5 million. And then another couple guys around him, UC Saros, $5 million. Vasilevsky, $9.5 million. We're not getting anywhere near that. But then Linus Ullmark, $5 million. Thatcher Demko, $5 million. I mean, you're going to have to at least give him, because I don't think he'll take the same. Especially, I feel like Jarry knows that there's not really many goalies competing for that starting spot. So I think he has leverage in that. So I think you're at least going to give him a $500,000 to $1 million increase in salary. So that would bump him to $4 to $4.5 million. And I think that would be fair for the most part, assuming that he doesn't have a collapse this season and looks terrible. And especially if we get into the playoffs and we win a round, sure, give him the $4.5 million. It's the first time we've won a round since 2018. But I think especially when you look at what are the other options that the Penguins have, if you're not going to trade for a goalie, what free agent market is going to be like next year? Some goalies on there: Keith Kincaid, Frederik Andersen, Anthony Stolarz, Mike Smith, Jeremy Swayman, Antti Ranta. I mean, these are guys that, like, maybe a couple years ago I would have been okay testing out as a starting goalie, but it's a lot of guys that I don't think that will get a shot anymore. I'm sure Frederik Andersen will, but he's probably going to warrant more money than people are willing to pay him. And then, but guys like Ranta and Mike Smith, Keith Kincaid, like, those are guys, Brian Elliott, James Reimer. I mean, these are all old. I just don't think that the Penguins have really any other choice. Unless they're going to trade for a goalie, you don't have a choice but to bring back Tristan Jarry.
That's the thing, too, is, man, like we talked about this on there. Where on earth do the Penguins have the leverage in this situation? Like, where can they pivot to if it's not Tristan Jarry? They can't pivot internally, and externally you just listed the options, and I wouldn't trust any one of those guys to do anything. So
at least any more than
Jeremy
Jarry
Swayman
would.
Maybe you mentioned Jeremy Swayman. I think he's a young kid, but
he's going to be an RFA. Boston's going to pay him. Yeah. So I just think it's more and more likely that Tristan Jarry will get a contract extension. Looking at the outside factors, because you're not going to trade. I just don't see the Penguins trading for a goalie. That just doesn't seem like something the Penguins are going to do. So at least free agent wise, it's not going to work that way. And then internally, you're at least waiting a couple years for Blomqvist to compete for a starting spot. So you have no choice but to bring back Tristan Jarry. The question is just how much is the contract going to be at that AAV?
Yeah, and I think you probably look at like a 2 to 3 year deal to probably. But again, it comes down to like Tristan to look at the rest of that market and be like, why would I sign that here? I mean, look at what I can get somewhere else.
It's like 6 months ago, you were handing out 6-year contracts like candy. Why can't I get one?
Yeah, exactly. Boy, oh boy. To kind of wrap this, to put a bow on the entire episode here, as Tyler mentioned at the beginning, like and subscribe everywhere. Hit us with a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this as well. All that good stuff, whatever platform you're watching or listening on. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave us a like. Leave us a comment, because we talked about a lot of different topics on here. We'd love to have you guys chime in, and maybe we can address some of that stuff. Ask us some questions for us to talk about on the following episode as well. Our Twitter, our pinned tweet, at Around the 412. It will give you the link to their GoFundMe. If you're not on Twitter, of course, you can just go to GoFundMe itself, type in Rockin' Around the 412. You can read about our Christmas mission there. You can donate right there as well. Every single penny donated will go to helping families in my area, not Tyler's area, at Christmas time, because this is where Tyler's from. His heart is still here, even though he's physically not. And as well on Twitter, get us to 17,000 followers so we can give away these Steelers Ravens.
If you don't have Twitter, you should make one. We're giving away Steeler tickets. Go give us a follow.
And if you're already on Twitter and you only got like one account, maybe you got a second as like a burner, Hey, there's no limit. Make like 10 of those things.
Exactly.
But other than that, for Smitty, for Tyler, this is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network, and we will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.